The HD5450 released in February 2010, and it's still being produced new today. It seems. If we go and look on the Micro Center website, they have some for sale for $60 brand new, which is quite weird because this is 12 years old now, almost 13. And the newest driver for this was released in the year 2015. This graphics card was intended for office use or just displaying an image, and it came with a 1GB and a 2GB variant. And it is not meant for gaming at all. And today, we're going to game on it. What can go wrong? That smell. Smells like something is burning. The first game up on the list is GTA 5, and at the lowest settings, which is considered normal in GTA 5, there is actually no true low settings, but on 720p on the lowest settings, it was getting around a gloriously smooth 15 frames per second, so perfect to play the game. Yeah, you can do absolutely everything perfectly at 15 frames per second and not get a headache. I guarantee it. No? Oh, come on. Also, my graphics card is overclocked. I went over and maxed out all of the sliders in MSI Afterburner, so it's got the biggest overclock possible on it, and it doesn't help it that much, but I'm just letting you know, it might be getting 1 or 2 frames per second more than it would normally. At 800 by 600 on the full screen mode, going down the main streets in the biggest city in GTA 5, it was getting around 22 frames per second. Not great at all, but at least it was an improvement over 720p. So at 800 by 600 at a half resolution setting, which would be 400 by 300, the game was getting around 32 frames per second. And it had some input lag, especially before when we were getting lower frame rates. But the input lag was mostly gone now when we were getting about 32 frames per second. Though, there was a problem. We still couldn't really see what we were trying to see because of all of the blurriness from this low resolution. But that's fine, at least it's playable now. But now we have a whole nother thing. How do we get rid of all the input lag? Well, if we limit the game to 30 frames per second, it basically gets rid of the input lag completely, and it runs pretty nicely as well. Well, I mean 30 frames per second, but you still can't see anything, but you know, at least it's somewhat smooth. Fall Guys at 720p on half resolution, which is 360p, was running okay on the low settings. When I say okay, I mean horrible. It was getting less than 20 frames per second all the time. You could get it to 20 frames per second if you tried, but looking in a direction where there's no action. But other than that, you were around 15, so you might be able to get away with it, but it's definitely not an ideal situation. Borderlands 3, I didn't expect it would be able to even launch, but it actually did launch, which is very surprising because this doesn't even run on my UHD 710 graphics, and it's running on this. Well, running meaning it runs on both of them, just horribly. But yeah, basically, even on the lowest settings, on the absolute lowest resolution, with the absolute lowest resolution scale, it was getting around 10 frames per second or less. Not great at all. Also, when I first launched the game, it actually was running at DirectX 12 mode, which makes no sense because the graphics card doesn't support DirectX 12. I set it to DirectX 11 and restarted the game, and it was fine. It just was running on DirectX 12 for some reason when I launched it, which doesn't even make any sense, but that's fine. BioShock at 720p was getting a little bit less than 30 frames per second all the time. It was getting around 28 frames per second, which is not horrible, just not ideal. But if I lowered the resolution down to 800 by 600, which is actually not even that low, because it can get down to 480 by, I forgot, it's like 480p. But yeah, 800 by 600, it was actually running somewhat decently, and it was getting around 40 frames per second, and it wasn't such a low resolution, you could still see what you're looking at, which is also an awesome bonus. I also tried 640 by 480, and I got a bunch of errors, so that's nice. Fortnite on performance mode at 720p on the lowest settings was getting a gloriously smooth 15 frames per second. You can win the game at 15 frames per second totally. But at 37% resolution scale, the game actually was running around 40 frames per second. You still couldn't exactly see anybody. They just look like smeared ants running around. But it was actually somewhat playable. I got 11th place, which, to be fair, I don't even know how to play the game properly, so I'd say that's pretty decent. I was driving around the map in a car. Rocket League I was actually expecting to run somewhat decently, though at 640 by 480, the game on the lowest settings possible, it was getting around a stuttery 20 frames per second. So that's not very good, though I did score a goal in the wrong team it seems. I scored a goal in my own team, which made me lose, but besides that, it did run just horribly. Supraland and Cyberpunk run amazingly. They run so good, they didn't open because they knew that this graphics card would run them like an absolute legend. Valorant at 720p on the deathmatch, because apparently deathmatch I won't get banned because I keep leaving the game, and every time I leave the game I get banned for like a week. It's weird. But no, like Valorant at 720p on the lowest settings, it was getting between 40 and 70 frames per second. So the lows were a little bit too low at times, but that's fine. I can still lower the resolution more if I wanted to. But, you know, for what I do in the game, which is get banned immediately, it's running quite good, because all I do is play the game for about 5 minutes at a time. But yeah, still, it ran, and I'd say for most people it would be perfectly playable. Team Fortress 2 at 720p on the lowest settings was getting around 45 to 50 frames per second outside, and I'm sure if you lowered the resolution even more, the frame rate would go up. But I'd say for most players, 45 frames per second and higher indoors is probably perfectly playable, so not bad. Yes, I know Team Fortress 2 is incredibly old, but still though, it's nice that something runs. CSGO on the lowest settings at 720p was getting around 20 to 30 frames per second. Definitely not ideal for CSGO, but it was running. But luckily at 480p, the game was getting around 40 to 50 frames per second, which is not ideal, but it is quite a bit better than 20 to 30, or lower than 20 to be fair, but still, it is running quite a bit better at 480p. And I also managed to come in 3rd place, which is quite nice, but I also was 3rd place because I was a Loudfoot. Apparently I'm noisy, the game says. Minecraft Java 1.19 with Sodium and Iris. I don't think Iris is technically needed for this because I'm not using shaders, but I have Iris installed anyway. Was getting around 50 frames per second on the lower settings with an 8 chunks render distance. So it's not ideal, but it is running and it is somewhat smooth-ish. The frame rate graph is going all over, but if you wanted it to be a little bit smoother, you could of course limit the game to around 45 frames per second. And I also tried Optifine, and Optifine was running a little bit worse, though I also didn't have a mod installed with Optifine called Enhanced Block Entities, where I had that mod installed with the Iris and Sodium mod. Because apparently it doesn't work with Optifine. I don't know why it used to, but now it just has a fit and gives me errors. If you're wondering what Enhanced Block Entities does, basically it gets rid of lag from blocks like chests, hoppers, repeaters, item frames, and stuff like that, which I have a lot around my world. Minecraft's Bedrock at 1080p on 8 chunks render distance with a mix of low and medium settings, or low and high settings, I don't know, some settings were off, some settings were on, so it's about medium. It was getting a nice, smooth 60 frames per second, which it ran quite a bit better than Minecraft Java with the vanilla, and with Sodium, and with Iris. So, I guess if you have an HD 5450, play Minecraft Bedrock, Windows 10 Edition, and it will be nice. Roblox Arsenal at 720p on the lowest Roblox Arsenal settings and the lowest Roblox settings, with a frame rate unlimiter, or uncapper, was getting 45 to 60 plus frames per second. So, it wasn't completely ideal, but it was a quite nice experience, and, well, I don't know what else I could say. It was playable. Also, limiting the frame rate to around 50 would get rid of pretty much every single frame rate fluctuation there was, but I don't really see a reason to here, but you can if you want. And now it's conclusion time. Do I recommend you to go out and buy a HD 5450? Well, that's upside down, but yeah, do I recommend you to go out and get one of these? And definitely not new. Maybe used for $7, I could see. Only if you have no integrated graphics. If you have any somewhat modern computer with integrated graphics, don't even bother with this. Any just somewhat modern integrated graphics, they will beat this by a lot. But if you were to have to get something for cheap, this would work, but I would also highly recommend getting one of these graphics cards, which are about $7 more. This is the wrong one. This right here is a Quadro 600, and they sell on eBay for around $14 used. They are about twice the speed as an HD 5450, or about the same speed as a GT 710, and I gotta say, this is a lot better than an HD 5450. Granted, $7 for the HD 5450 used versus $14, so it's twice the price. Or if you're willing to spend a little bit more, you can get a Quadro K600 for around $22. I don't know how much faster a Quadro K600 is. Yes, I'm holding a Quadro K600 in my hand, but this is a broken K600. I do want to get my hands on a working K600 someday, but yeah. I've heard they're just basically about the same, but maybe it is slightly faster. But yeah, basically, it depends. I don't recommend a HD 5450, but if you have to get it, go ahead.